something you're unlikely to hear anyone say in this entire fight over the possible government shutdown. The deficit, the thing that everyone's worried about, the deficit is shrinking at a record-setting, jaw-dropping rate. Since 2009, the annual budget deficit has been reduced by nearly 60%, according to the most recent report from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. The projected deficit in 2015 will be 2.1% of the total economy's output, or just 1/5 of what it was at the height of the recession in 2009. That spike you see at the beginning of this chart shows the effect of the Great Recession. The steep decline in the annual budget deficit means we are already reaching normal levels. And more than 2/3 of that deficit decline is coming from revenue, as the economy improves and higher taxes on wealthy individuals kick in. So the sequester and other draconian cuts forced on us by Republicans are not the chief drivers of that drop in budget deficits. As Republicans freaked out over the deficit after President Obama took office, progressives as well as mainstream economists tried to press the point that in large part the ballooning deficits would right themselves as the economy improved. And that is basically what has happened. Meanwhile, House Speaker John Boehner and Republicans are frozen in their 2009-2010 mindset. The conversation about the deficit hasn't changed even though the numbers have. Republicans are talking about the spending problem identical to 2009 before they managed to get the Budget Control Act and the sequester and all the cuts they've been working for. They won't accept that in that respect they won. They still want to cut more. Things like food stamps. New independent estimates show that as many as 3.8 million people would lose their food stamp benefits in 2014 under a House Republican plan to tighten eligibility. This is at a time when we have outrageous, unacceptable levels of poverty. The number of Americans living in poverty rose to 46.5 million last year, according to a just-released Census Bureau report. Joining me to discuss this now is Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president of the American Action Forum, former director of domestic and economic policy for John McCain's presidential campaign in 2008. And Doug, I feel like there's two ways to think about austerity and budget cuts, right? There's a kind of empirical or technical macroeconomic case to say, hey, look, we had this crisis. We ran up huge deficits. It was 10% of GDP. That is historically abnormal. We got to do something about it. But when you get deficits down to what are essentially normal manageable levels and you're still looking to, squeeze tighter and tighter, haven't you just left the realm of kind of technocratic and technical critique and into the realm of just pure ideological commitment?
Well, I think the important thing to recognize is the pattern you described, where deficits come down in the near term as the economy improves, is one that CBO expected to happen all along. Anyone who follows budgetary matters should have expected that. The striking fact is that past 2015-16, all the numbers turned bad again because the one thing that hasn't been touched, the one thing that hasn't been addressed, is in fact the majority of the budget that is in the large so-called mandatory spending programs, the Medicare's, Medicaid, Social Security's, farm subsidies. That has to be the focus of a budget negotiation, and I think conservatives on the whole would be quite pleased to trade $1 of sequester cuts for $1 of reforms. That deal has never actually been put on the table, and if it would just
here's what has been on the table. There have been deals put on the table at basically 3 or 4 different junctures in which the White House has desperately wanted to do something about spending on social insurance programs. In fact, I don't think they should. I actually think those problems are going to be dealt with through changes to the way that inflation and healthcare costs happen. But let's say you think it's a good idea. The White House has time and time again said, please work with us here. Let's cut Social Security. And the House Republican caucus particularly has run away from the deal.
I think that's not a fair reading of the recent history. I mean, the group that has been most opposed to that has been Democrats. Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi in particular have said any change in entitlements is dead on arrival. So there has been no chance for that kind of deal to happen. And indeed, the president himself both authored the sequester and ignored.
House Speaker Boehner did not ever push them to call that bluff, right? I mean, the point is that
why is it House Speaker Boehner's job to force the president to call his own party's bluff when they have blocked entitlement reform for 25 years?
The president has offered the deal, right?
And he's been just as effective in getting that deal done as he was in getting Larry Summers confirmed and prosecuting a war in Syria. Okay, so he needs to actually lead his own party and get serious about this.
Let me ask you this. We have a completely, hold on one second. Because you and I here are sitting talking about actuarial projections in 2016. We have an absolutely destroyed and broken labor market. We've had 45 million people in poverty. poverty. We are going through austerity that is not helping people with depressed wages, and this is the conversation we have, and it drives me out of my mind because I cannot, for the life of me, find one person on the Republican side of the aisle who cares or has anything constructive to say. I'm being totally serious here about any of those economic problems.
I take issue with that in several ways. Number one, the entire conversation has been how best to make the economy grow, because that is the quickest route to solve the poverty problems, to get the 14% of Americans who are either unemployed or underemployed back to work, to have the median income rise instead of fall during the recovery as it has in this one. And the president has, in an unrelenting fashion, offered exactly the same plan every single time, unwilling to marshal a willingness to change Social Security, which, for example, would have no near-term impact, no austerity, and open the budget room for the kinds of things that you want. So the problem lies in the White House.
You are telling me that chain CPI or some kind of cut to Social Security benefits is going to be the thing that raises median wages, reduces poverty in the U.S., and gets GDP growth up to 3% and unemployment down to 4.5%?
It would be a good thing in its own right, because right now the plan is to cut Social Security 25% across the board in 20 years. That is the plan under current law. So no one's going to introduce cuts to Social Security. They're already on the books. The question is, can you do something sensible and not cut retirees' wages in the middle of their retirement? So how would you do that, and what benefits would you get? You'd actually introduce a plan and convince Democrats to go along and have a real plan. Chain CPI is not Social Security reform. It's a technical fix. Have a plan for reform like the Bowles-Simpson Commission did.
Wait a second.
And then, let me finish, and then, having done that, you would have sent the signal to the world capital markets that the United States is serious about its budget problems. You would have forever taken the pressure off rating agencies to scrutinize the U.S. You would have incentivized firms to locate in the United States, and you would have given them some reason.
There is essentially zero empirical evidence that the thing that is holding back American growth at this moment is any hesitancy on the part of world capital markets about long-term debt. That is not borne out by the facts.
How about the failure of any firms to locate in the United States when the current plan is to either let debt go out of control or raise taxes to fix it? They don't want to locate here. Why are the trillions of dollars in the U.S. balance sheets not coming back to the U.S.? Well, that's the place where you can actually finance a private sector expansion. All that has been true for years, and there's been no change in the administration's strategy whatsoever. They have repeatedly gone back to the well. They actually invented the sequester, thinking that it would be so bad it would force everybody to raise taxes and,
and it was embraced by the Republican Party.
They got the tax increases they asked for. What they've never delivered is anything from their side of the aisle on an agenda to make the social safety net last for the next 20 years, open up the budget room to do the kinds of infrastructure the president wants, do the kind of research the president wants. He has the keys. Put him in the ignition, drive the car. The problem's in his party.
He will put the keys in the ignition. John Boehner will grab the wheel and promptly put it into the cliff. Douglas Holtz-Eakin from the American Action Forum, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with Click 3.